You're muted.
Yeah, I was saying that we have 4 more minutes just to wait for the people to get into the Zoom. So but thank you, Mr. Mark Green, for being with us, and I'm so happy to have you here in this time.
See a couple familiar names.
How was the raining, Mr. Mark, in your area last night?
Raining?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got 6 tenths and it's about to start raining again. I hope it doesn't storm and knock me out while we're talking.
Yeah.
But we needed it real bad. So
I bet. Do you think that this year was like a drier than other years?
it seemed to be, even though we had the moisture in the summer, it's the way it shut off, at least down here, but I think it was very widespread. I'm almost thinking the plants didn't put a good root system down and then it turned off dry, because my place was drier than I've ever seen it.
How many years have been grazing?
I've been personally grazing only about 7 years.
Okay.
I've been helping people for 40 years.
Okay.
And working around this Southwest Missouri. I'm not going to say it was the driest I've seen it, but for a fall, it was rough. Thankfully, we started getting some November rains, but that'll help us next year. But
Yeah. Some instructions for the attendees. We appreciate very much all the attendees already that are in the Zoom meeting. We are going to appreciate if you write, you can rename. You have like in the size of your name, like a three dots, three points over there. So you can rename, and if you can write your last name, so that we have like the 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 sign-in list here for the people that came. So the idea is for the people that participate in several webinars, we are going to have like a raffle for some books to send for the people that were constant during all the winter certificate. And also we are going to give some credits. So if you cannot come during all the 12 talks that we have, you can complete with the last year, or you can complete with some in-person talks that we are going to have during the year. So we want to have all this information going on. Okay, I think it's time to start. Okay, I will start in just for the people that are already here. Good afternoon. My name is Homero Salinas, Dr. Salinas at Lincoln University. I am extension state specialist in small ruminant, and we are very happy to launch this winter certificate on small ruminants management. Um, we are going to go a little bit deeper than the last year is what the people were asking for us to be going like deeper with deeper information and with some emphasis that you can see during the different topics that we are planning for the 12 talks that we are going to have from now November till February on Mondays, 4 o'clock. We are going to skip some Mondays during holidays and some other days. And right now, I just want to repeat, we are going to be on Mondays, 4 o'clock. I will be sending a promotion about each webinar, the speaker, the topic. You can register, or you registered already. You don't have to register again. You have to make some specific recommendation for the speaker to talk about it. So you can send information through the registration. And also the screen, your screens and your microphones will be now open just for managing the times. But you are very welcome to write any comment, any questions, any suggestions in the chat. And we are going to be managing, or the speaker will be managing also that. So with this, also my fellow mates here at the Lincoln will be introducing by themselves. Dr. Acharya.
Hello, everybody. First, welcome everyone. This is Mohan Acharya from Lincoln University. I work as a state extension specialist working for small ruminants, specifically sheep and goat. So if you have any questions regarding small ruminants, you can reach out to me or Dr. Salinas or Gabriel is here. So just reach out to us and we will be there for help. Thank you.
My name is Gabriel Apple. I am the small ruminant program educator here working with Dr. Salinas and Dr. Acharya. I get kind of all the extra stuff and extra questions. So if you ever have any questions and you need something from one of them and you can't get a hold of them, you can always reach out to me. So I'm happy to be here to help you guys and help facilitate these events. We have our speaker today is going to be Mr. Mark Green. He's going to be talking about some winter stockpile and bale grazing. He has a presentation for us, so we really appreciate you guys being here today, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Gabriel. Yeah, my name is Mark Green. I worked for NRCS as a grazing specialist for 40 years here in Southwest Missouri. I'm located just north of Springfield, about 10 miles near the town of Fair Grove. Now that I'm retired, I do contract grazing with cattle. I do have some goats now, thanks to my granddaughter and grandma. So I'm getting educated more on the goats. So that's kind of my background. I've worked on grazing systems and grassland management for 45 years. So hopefully I can give you some information today that'll help. So I guess I'll move on into my presentation and yeah. So we see that all right?
Yes, good.
Okay. So we're talking about stockpiling and bale grazing to look at some possibilities on winter pasture. And stockpiling basically is we're accumulating some growth from some other period to use it later, save it up and use it later when we need it. And that's what I'm going to kind of go into some details here on how that can work for you and some keys to making it work the best. I think I'd just go ahead and ask for that first question, though, just right off the bat, if that's all right.
Okay, the first question. So the idea during the presentation is to have some polls with some questions. So the idea I will be launching the question, and the idea is for you to answer it. So the question is, which is the best forage to stockpile? And the answer is Bermuda, tall fescue, orchard grass, or crabgrass. Select one, please. And so already we have 38% of people, 42, 51, 60% of the people. Okay, so you can answer the question.
So are you ready for me? Is that?
Let me just, okay, okay. I will be now sharing the results. So those are the results. 24 serve Bermuda, 43 tall fescue, 29 orchard grass, and 1% crabgrass. So now you can give feedback, Mr. Green.
So, oh, I'm sorry. Now I see it. This is all new to me.
Do you see now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting to do that. I think that's kind of neat. And basically, well, I apologize, but my next slide kind of goes into it more. But the key to this is growing that stockpile, and then the other key is utilizing it correctly. But tall fescue is the correct answer. What we've learned, we call it our secret weapon here in Missouri, or wherever you can grow tall fescue, because I'll just skip on down to the very bottom bullet point there. Fescue has a waxy layer on the leaf that makes it resistant to weathering. Now, that cuticle layer that's very waxy on fescue will actually let it hold up longer in winter temperatures, freezing temperatures, and hold its quality better than any other grass. So that fall regrowth we're after and accumulates high concentrates of carbohydrates. But the key is that the tall fescue is the best one for it because of that. Orchard grass, very high quality forage. It's a cool season also, but it will degrade as we get into winter much faster than tall fescue. Bermuda grass and crabgrass, both being warm season grasses, once their freeze hits, they pretty well lose their quality. You can stockpile them. You can stockpile any forage, but the fescue will hold its quality better than about any other forage. And I'll show you some of this quality information as we go on later. So actually, I think I maybe just gave away the second question.
Yeah, do you want for me to?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do the second question.
Okay.
I got one. I'm got ahead of myself.
Okay. What will be the best time to start the stockpiling for the winter? Winter, spring, summer, fall. Okay, we have 15, 16 people, 17 people, 20 people, almost everyone. So your last chance to answer now. Okay, I will be. Okay, those are the answers.
Okay. So pretty much the correct answer would be the fall regrowth. We want to use that spring regrowth or that spring growth. We want to get it off of there. If we tried to stockpile the spring growth on fescue, by the time we get into the winter, it's very low quality, and we'll actually lose some growth because we'd have too much of it laying out there. So what we're doing is we're trying to remove that spring growth. You save up the fall growth for the stockpile. So either graze off or hay off that spring growth. If a person is actually harvesting seed on fescue, that several do down there in Southwest Missouri still, you still need to get that spring growth off of there after they've harvested the seed. What we're doing is we're trying to get it ready for fall growth. So come about mid to late August, ideally the area you're picking for stockpile, you have 3 to 6 inches of leaf there. You're shooting for about 60 to 90 days of growth before the growing season ends. The other thing to look at is possibly putting on some nitrogen, maybe and I'll talk about timing here in a little bit and show some information on it. I put maybe there with a question mark because we can still do a pretty good job of stockpiling without nitrogen. I've stockpiled 3 or 4 different years here lately and not put any nitrogen on. I could probably get more yield with nitrogen, but then you got to kind of look at the economics of it. But I'll talk about that a little more here in a second. But basically, then you're going to not graze that area or defer the grazing. I say here up till early December or when you need it. If you've got other pastures to utilize through the fall and you don't need that stockpile till January, don't use it. It'll hold its quality all the way through March. Pretty good. Question I'd have here, I wish I'd have done this one as a question, actually. I didn't even think about it. If you look at these 4 pastures and you were thinking about stockpiling, choosing the proper one to stockpile, so that upper left one, we've got probably pretty decent stand of fescue. The upper right is fescue that's headed out and gone mature. The lower left is an overgrazed fescue pasture, and then the lower right is probably not much of anything, just a clump of foxtail. If you were picking one of those to stockpile, say those were all for your different pastures, your best return is going to be that one that's got the decent stand of fescue on it to stockpile. That, as I said earlier, that top right one with the spring growth and the seed heads and everything is not going to provide you a good stockpile area. And obviously that foxtail area, that bare ground, is not going to provide you any stockpile either. So if you're trying to pick an area to try some stockpile on, your better stand of tall fescue is going to do the better job for you. This is what I was referring to on the nitrogen application. This is some research done some years back in Missouri. The dates of when it was applied comparing the dates applied of nitrogen and the rates anywhere from 0 up to 120 pounds. The biggest thing to look at on this is if you compare, we put that nitrogen on in early August, late August, or early September. And the difference in yield, for example, the 40-pound one, how much it dropped from almost 3,000 pounds in early August down to, say, 2,200 pounds when we didn't get it on until early September. So timing can really make a difference if we're fertilizing for stockpile. I would throw out a note too that personally I would never apply much more than 50 pounds. That 80 pounds, 120 pounds may really show some yield, but the economics of it and is not really going to pay. But that 30, 40, 50 pounds is worth considering. I always get the question about snow and ice because I said, well, if you don't need it till January, don't use it. What about snow and ice? Cows will graze through up to about 9 inches of snow without any problem. And sheep and goats will dig through it and graze through it. Now, I don't know, I can't say the 9 inches. I honestly don't know where that level is, but they will dig through it and there's a big if right there, if we don't start feeling sorry for them and start putting hay out. Usually we think they need the hay a lot sooner than they need the hay. If we let them learn to graze through that hay, that snow, that quality of that forage is still mighty good down there. Ice is a whole different story. If we have a bad ice storm, and anybody's experienced an ice storm knows you get that coating of ice on it, they're not going to be able to graze through that, and we'll have to supplement something else. What about quality? Do I need to supplement the quality of this fescue? This is some research that was done here in Missouri using fecal analysis on cattle, but this first one talks about crude protein of that tall fescue. And of course, I think we'd all know that are familiar with fescue. They're in October, really good protein, 18, 22% protein. But if you go on across there, even in March when it's brown, it was still 9 to 11% protein. So it'll hold its quality good, and I'll address the needs of the animal here in a minute, but just think about that. Even in March, 9 to 11% protein, and the digestibility of it, 60, 68% there in November, but still it's 58 to 60% in March. Still pretty good feed. If we look at animal requirements, and these are just general, I didn't get real detailed, but that doe, when she's dry, around 10% protein, 55, 60% TDN. She's lactating 11 to 14%, 60, 65%. That ewes similar. And then even that dry cow can get by with even less, 7% protein, 49% TDN. If you back up here on that TDN, for example, we still got, especially those dry animals, we got very good quality forage going clear on into March. So barring any ice storms or heavy snowstorms, if you've got enough of it, you could get clear through to March on it. And this shows comparing it to hay, average hay. So like the energy or TDN digestibility of the hay is that kind of pink line, about 60%. That stockpile started at about 70%, and on into March it was down to 60%. The protein, same thing. Comparing it to most hay we can get put up. Doesn't mean that hay was bad, but probably average. So it'll hold its own against any other forage we can provide for it, even better. The other thing about it is that ergovaline and the endophyte infected fescue that can affect the animals and their performance. It actually starts dropping through the winter. It might be up there pretty normal in October and November even, but we found as we get on into those winter months, that toxicity starts dropping. So it's actually a higher, you take that into account with the protein and energy, it's pretty decent quality forage through there. So the advantages of this stockpile grazing is we can reduce costs compared to, hands down, an animal can always harvest, eat grass cheaper than we can ever feed anything to it. So the more we can let that animal harvest it and graze it, it's always going to be more economical. We can reduce time and labor, and I'm going to talk about how to feed this out here in a second. the quality I talked about, and we can spread that manure out better over the pastures. But so we've got this fescue field growed up. Say we got 10 inches out there, a nice fescue, 25 acres of it. If we just turn them in there, it's kind of like if I had all my hay, I put it out there in the pasture and I just turn them all in that pasture at the beginning of the winter and say, here you go. Is that going to be very good use of your pasture or your hay? I'm sorry. So you're going to get all kinds of waste. So we need to think of that same thing with our pasture, and we need to look at stripping it out and only giving them maybe a 1 to 3 day grazing. And 3's even getting kind of long because you'll get more waste as you give them an area, a bigger area. That waxy cuticle I mentioned earlier, if that cow steps on it or you drive over it, you'll break that cuticle and lose all those nutrients. If you've ever driven out through a pasture on a frosty morning and then later on you'll see your tracks, kind of a dead area, looks dead area. Well, that's what happened. You broke that waxy layer on that plant. So if we can not do that as much as possible, we can waste a lot less. So giving them more like a 1 to 3 day, 2 days ideal. We can improve our utilization. If we give them up to 2 weeks, we've only got maybe 35% utilization. So if we can just strip them across that area away from the water, we can get a lot of feed out of that fescue and not waste near as much. This is another slide just showing that if we get up to 3 days grazing, and I already mentioned that 3 days is probably almost too much. We can get maybe 70% utilization, not wasting it. If we give them a 7-day strip, we're going to waste half of it. They're going to step on it, lay on it, manure piles, things like that. If we give them a 2-week allocation, we're going to waste 60% of it. So we really need to allocate that, and just like feeding your hay. This is just another way of looking at it. And even during the growing season, but over there on the right, we can get anywhere from 75% utilization out of that pasture compared to 40%. So basically we're doubling the amount of feed we can get in them.
Do you want to do that last poll?
No, I'm going to wait till we get to talking on bale grazing, if that's all right, Gabriel. Thank you.
Yeah. But I did want to ask, I had a question real quick in the chat.
Sure.
And it's asking what part per million of Ergovaline starts to become a health problem for sheep and or goats?
I apologize that I don't know. I wish I did on sheep and goats, but I'm not even going to try to guess.
Yeah, it seems like it's 0.5 part per million, and dry matter intake. Yeah.
0.5.
Yeah, 0.5. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's anything, just any of the grazing animals, things we can do to help with that is always going to be a positive thing.
Yeah, but you were sharing that accordingly to during the fall, the concentration of those toxins is lower in the fescue than in the spring or during the summer. Is that true?
Yes, it'll be lower as we get into the fall, and then as farther we get into the winter, it'll even drop a lot more.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of like stored hay. If we've got it in stored hay, the longer it's stored, it'll drop.
Okay.
So it's similar type situation. So basically, we're giving them this 2-day allocation, and moving a polywire away from our water source is what we're trying to do to utilize it properly. I apologize, a lot of my slides are cattle, but we can do the same thing with sheep and goats. Now, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes on this strip part. because knowing how to calculate how big a strip you want to give them is kind of important. So we need to kind of estimate how much forage yield we got, what kind of utilization we're going to be using, what their intake rate is, and basically to calculate the acres needed and then calculate that strip size. So looking at that forage yield, there's that out there. If you've ever been to grazing school, we use grazing sticks on measuring it. And a pretty good rule of thumb is this one right here. If it's a low density stand, it's probably about 150 to 250 pounds per inch per acre. All the way up to high density stand might be up there in that 400 pounds per inch per acre. So if you're measuring it and it's 6 inches tall, you take that times this, and that's how much it'd be a good estimate of how much forage is out there at the time. On back to that harvest efficiency, less than 3 days, we can get up there in that 65, 70%. And then that animal, what's their needs when you're calculating it for your strip. Dry animals are in that 2% range if they're lactating, more like the 3% if they're lactating and a growing animal, like a first calf heifer, for example, more in the 3.5%. So let's look at an example right quick. And so say we've got 10 inches of growth out there, and of what we stockpiled, say it's 10 inches tall, medium density. So we got 10 inches times 300 pounds per inch. So that's saying we got about 3,000 pounds of dry matter per acre out there. If we want to give them a 2-day allocation, which is about 70% harvest efficiency, because we don't want to, we're never feeding grazing it clear into the ground, but we can go a little tighter when the grass isn't growing. So 70% of the 3,000 says we've got about 2,100 pounds available to feed them at that point when you measured it. So I've got a cow here for an example, but however big that animal is, times, in this case, we're using 3% is what their intake rate is. So that 1,100 pound cow needs 33 pounds a day of dry matter. If it was a 200 pound goat or whatever animal weight, you do it the same way. So in this herd, I'm going to say we got 25 cows, so 33 pounds. My herd needs 825 pounds of dry matter for a day. Okay. So we said we had 2,100 pounds available based on our measurement and our 70% harvest utilization. We said the herd needs 825 pounds per day. So if I take that 825 pounds, what they need, divide it by what I've got available, that says I need about 0.39 acres per day. We're shooting for 2-day allocation. So that means about 0.78 acres per day. Of course, I always say, what does that tell us? Very few people, if any, can go out there and visualize how big 0.78 acres is. So let's take it a little farther. If this particular field was 1,320 feet long and 820 feet, 5 feet wide, the one I've got my stockpile in, I said I need 0.78 acres for those cows for 2 days. There's 43,560 square feet in an acre. So if I take that times my 0.78, and then I divide that by my known width of my pasture, 825 feet, that's saying I need a 41-foot wide width strip for those 2 days. So I figured out how many square feet I need, which I guess I should have showed that in here, 43,560 times 0.78. I divide it by the distance between my two permanent fences. It says I need a 41-foot strip. So I would step off 41 feet. Big key is know how big your step is. There's no man alive that takes a 3-foot step. But anyway, and then that's how I come up with a strip. Thing I stress too is, say you go out there into the first 2 days and you got a bunch left, something miscalculated, adjust your strip for the next time. It's not the end of the world. And so based on those calculations, if that was a 25-acre pasture and I was using deeded 0.39 acres per day, that 25 acres should last me about 64 days. That's not too shabby if I could get that stockpile to last me 2 months into the winter. So, saying all that, let's say my stockpile is a little short this year, and I want to try to help it along with some hay. Which, side note, a lot of us know, as dry as we've had these falls here lately, it's really hurt our stockpile. So let's say I want to feed some hay along with it. Would you say this is acceptable to do it this way? I would say we're wasting a lot of hay. So if I was going to feed hay along with my stockpile, that's where I want to switch gears a little bit. It's not totally, but by bale grazing. So I think I would, we're going to set these bales out ahead of time. We're going to strip graze those bales, which can extend our stockpile fescue, also distribute that manure better, and it's less labor overall. I'm going to touch on that a little bit. If we're doing this, Gabriel, I'd say that third or whoever's doing it, I'm sorry, I'll take that third question.
Okay, I will go with the third question. Okay, there is go. When feeding bales, how many days worth of hay should be put out at one time? The options are 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 7 days. Well, it seems like the people is not sleeping. Yeah, your talk is good. Okay, I will, and for the last chance. Okay, over there the results.
Okay. So it really goes back to the same discussions with the stockpile, trying to reduce waste. So ideally, we're going to get the least waste if we can stay 2 days or below. 3 days would be doable too, but my experience and watching others, the 2 days would be ideal. So that's what I'm going to kind of share here as we go along. So bale grazing. There's a professor with Kentucky, Greg Halleck, that's done a lot of work with this. If you ever get to find some of his work, he's an ag economist there, but he's done a lot of work on bale grazing. And the bottom line is we are setting out quite a few bales ahead of time. For example, if you look at this is some I did, those bales going out in the row there. I put 2 rows of bales out to strip graze along with my stockpile. My stockpile wasn't very good that year, so I extended it with the bales. So basically what you're doing is the same thing we did with the stockpile. Calculate how much stockpile I've got, what's your average bale size, what's the herd needs, but you're going to throw that bale amount in there too. to calculate out how big a strips I need plus how many bales I need. And in my case, I came up with, I say no more than 3 days here. I really feel after doing it myself several times, I even like the 2 days better because it's less waste. And I came up with this example. I had about 6 inches of stockpile, 2 bales. So I put 2 rows of bales out there and stepped off my strips. I do not remember how big, wide these strips were now, but they might have been 25 feet. No, they weren't that. They might have been 20 feet wide. And no, anyway, doesn't matter. And so by having those bales already out there, all I had to do is run polywire, do my strips of polywire between them, and basically we're giving them a strip of grass and 2 bales the same way you're stockpiling, you just supplemented it. What I did also is at that time I had 5 reels of polywire. So I went ahead and laid out 5 strips. So every 2 days, all I had to do is roll up a polywire compared to starting the tractor, loading bales up, going out and feeding them, and just saving labor and time. And I don't feel it wastes as much hay. One tip that somebody taught me is just before I turn them into that strip, I would turn those 2 bales up on the end, because they will clean those bales up much better if they're turned up on end. I don't know if it's getting cut off by the pictures or you can see it, but like there's a bales turned up on end where these cows are over on the right. And it really does improve the efficiency decrease the waste on these bales.
Sorry, Mr. Green. I think there's a couple questions. Do you mind if I?
Yeah, be great.
There was actually one that I'd like to go back to, but let's go with the ones that are on topic, and then I'll go back to that one after that.
Okay.
How many head of sheep or goats do you expect to eat a bale in 2 days?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. How many head? If this is an 800-pound bale, which is probably, a lot of people think the bales are a lot bigger than they really are. And you're going to still have 10, 15% waste, maybe 20%. So you're talking, let's say 650 pounds of dry matter there. And what's a good weight on a sheep? Some of you sheep people, tell me a good weight on a ewe.
Oh, it's here.
Pardon me?
I was gonna say, so we got 130.
130. So if you take 130 pounds, I'm going to stick with the 3% of their body weight. If you take 130 times 3%, what's that? Making me do my math here.
It'd be about 4%, about 4.
4 pounds.
Yeah.
So that ewe's probably eating about 4 pounds a day. So that is a little different story. You're talking, you got 600 pounds of dry matter out there. That'd be a lot of sheep, wouldn't it? Yeah. So I'm thinking, if you're going to try to do this with sheep, you may want to look at I didn't use rings or anything. And you may want to look at a way to maybe bale graze, unroll part of it if you can, or in a feeder. Ideally, I'll tell you the ideal, but not all of us could do it, is either you could unroll part of that hay for 2 days and then take the rest to the next strip, or if you had a feeder that was mobile. It all sounds good, doing that isn't, I understand totally. I've got an old tractor and a four-wheeler. That's all I have. So the other option could be that this hay in a feeder you have off to the side that you could help them position it where they could come to, but you're still stripping your pasture away from it, kind of like you're watering, because you're stripping if you remember right, I said you're stripping away from the water. We're not worried about a back wire, if that makes sense, because this is wintertime, no regrowth. So you could strip away from your feeders too. If that makes sense. I'd try to go back to that one slide, but if you had your hay in the feeder and strip away from it on your grass, still let them come back to the feeder, but you're still spreading that manure and stuff with those animals and allocating the grass out to a couple days at a time.
Awesome.
But I'm glad that question came up because I honestly hadn't put the figures to it myself. And it would probably, with sheep, it would probably need to be, and goats, either in some feeders that they would keep coming back to, or you unrolled it.
Okay. I'll let you get, there's a couple more questions I haven't forgotten about, you guys, but I'm gonna let you get back to your presentation. So and I don't want to take up too much time, and then if we have time for the questions, we'll get to those at the end.
Well, I'll finish this up right quick because this, the interesting part about it, at least with cattle, when you turn them into that new strip with the hay and the grass, some of them will start on the hay, some of them will start on the grass, grazing. And probably the majority of them start grazing before they hit the hay, is what I've found. Does eliminate those boss cows that want to hog all the hay because they all just spread out. And obviously lessens mud issues if we can look at ways to not concentrate those animals. This is huge too, though. It spreads that manure out. If needed, these two shots, the top one is right after I finished grazing that area, and those tan areas is where the bales were. Very little residue left. They cleaned it up very good. And then this is the next spring on the lower one. I never bothered seeding it. It filled back in. Some guys will go back in there and throw some clover and maybe an improved forage in those areas to try to help it. Just a real quick thing to consider when we're spreading that manure out, though, and moving that grass, that bale out. There's a lot of nutrients in that bale, and that cow recycles, any ruminant recycles a bunch of the phosphorus and potash. So if we can use those animals to spread that out across the pasture rather than it all piled up around a feeder or something, even if you're coming back to those feeders with those sheep we were talking about earlier, if we were able to strip that grass out where they're still moving out across there, we're going to help spread that manure out better. So this is some data Jim Garish and those guys put together years ago. But if we look at rotation frequency and how many years it would take on a cow to get a pile of manure per square yard, on a 2-day rotation, it'd take about 2 years. Whereas continuous grazing, where they're out on a big pasture all the time, it would take about 27 years. So that's a real plus too, is we're spreading those nutrients out instead of them all piled up around a feeder or in a pen. I've got a quick and deal here on the polywire. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with it or not, but you're not going to be able to do this without polywire. Just real fast, I'm going to go through this. Polywire, reels, step-in posts, and portable charger. Even if you got all barbed wire and woven wire, you could do this strip grazing with a couple of reels and some polywire. The biggest thing I want to say about polywire, I only buy 9-strand polywire. Anything else is not good quality and will give you problems. It comes in 3-strand, 6-strand, 9-strand as far as the wires. And the gears, the reels, the geared ones are 1-to-3 ratio, sure make it a lot nicer to reel this up. When you're rolling a quarter mile of this up, it's a 1-to-3 ratio. Step in post, I look at a wide step, a small diameter steel spike, and a post like this one, these O'Briens. You could put multiple wires on there for sheep and goats. I use them with my goats, no problem. Some of these others aren't very good quality, and the huge spikes, you can't get them in the ground. The pigtails are great for cattle, but with sheep and goats, pretty hard to add more wires, so you're probably not going to use those. And I would avoid the rebar ones, just cause you problems. If you don't have electric fence already, there are portable chargers out there. You can power that reel, and you can do strip grazing even if you got all woven wire and barbed wire. So very handy tools to use. Just for example, I've got 8 or 9 reels on my place I use all the time. So if we're trying to strip graze this stuff, the stockpile with our bales, that's what we're after, and getting that manure spread out. So I think that's about all I had to give y'all. I hope that was all right.
Do you want to stop sharing your presentation,
Yeah.
Mr. Green? Yes,
Sir. See if I can figure it out. Okay.
Yeah, good. So now, some of the so could be like a question. So you were saying that with this strategy, you would be reducing your costs. So in your experience, for the people that manage everything, like for feeding during the winter with hay, and in the traditional way at the barn, or just with a kind of lots or whatever. So how much do you think that you can reduce labor or your costs?
On the costs, you
Yeah.
said?
Mhm.
Yeah. I usually have cost information in there, but I think in about 2 or 3 weeks I was going to address the cost
Yeah,
on winter
yeah, that is true.
compared to hay, so I kind of saved that. But serious, and I will go into detail on that. What is it, on the 8th or 9th or whatever?
Mhm.
But yeah, you can, when you compare the cost of feeding that hay, well, just as an example, if you take pasture, whether stockpile or during growing season, and you set the cost at 100, just at an index of 100, compare that to any feeding that, trying to feed that grazing animal any other feed, whether it's hay, whether it's grain. Hay is going to be about 2.5 times the cost, about 260 compared to that 100. Grain is going to be about 3 to 4 times the cost, because you got things in between the cow and the grass. You got your labor, the machinery, the fuel, the fertilizer. So the stockpile fits right in there, probably even more, because of having to feed it on top of having harvesting it and then having to feed it. And I do have some figures that'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's one of those stay tuned things.
Yeah. And sometimes when you get hay, you have to buy the hay. It's not as good as the one that you have up there in the stockpile. And later on, because if you are gaining weight or you have pregnant animals, you have to feed, and sometimes you have to feed with grain, so you will be losing a lot. So in the complete picture, you will be losing much more money that you don't get a good strategy to have enough good forage during the winter. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's actually kind of a good segue into one of the questions that got missed in the earlier from Miss Nolden about the what proportion of dry matter from hay versus stockpile are you trying to get for the diets with the combo of bale set on stockpile fescue?
Well, that's actually what I did, and what I've seen done with other calculations is we converted it all to dry matter. And so in my case, I calculated out how much dry matter I had in my existing stockpile, and then I supplemented it with the hay. So I wasn't after a certain proportion. You're coming up with, okay, how much stockpile do I have? And if I want to provide 2 days of grazing, if I added one bale of hay at 800 pounds, don't forget to take your waste off. You're always going to waste, no matter what, you're going to waste probably 15% or better, just the way it is. So don't automatically think they're going to eat all 800 pounds, but whatever amount of feed is in that hay, I'll adjust my stockpile strip, reduce it, but I really have never been after a certain portion. I'm just trying to make the stockpile go a little longer. Now, that being said, I know some guys that bale graze that really don't even have stockpile, so they calculate it all based on their bales. They'll lay them out there on just a decent width strip, maybe 25-foot width, and just keep moving them though, because then they're still moving spreading the manure.
Okay, thank you. And then one other question, going a little bit farther back, I just want to make sure that we cover everybody's questions. When you were discussing the ergovaline, is there anything that can be done to help lower that toxicity, or is it really just based on time of year?
The toxicity in fescue. Now that I'm retired and don't work for USDA, I can say some things that maybe I couldn't before when I worked for the government. There really is no magic mineral or magic supplement that's going to help reduce the toxicity. The research has shown that. But if we can, maybe y'all have heard the old thing, it's solution to pollution is dilution. If we can have other things in there to help it during the growing season compared to stockpile, the more clover I can have in with that fescue, the better off I am. The more I can keep that fescue vegetative, it's not as high in vegetative stage as it is in, like, it's very hot in the seed head, for example. You see an animal stripping the seed head off, they're getting a full dose of the toxicity. It's higher in the bottom stem of the plant. So if we're grazing it too tight, they're getting more toxicity. So it's probably more from the management side. If I can keep it closer, that's kind of one of the other pluses of the stockpile. It's going to be in the vegetative state. And then during growing season, if I can have some other species in there with it, that diversity.
Awesome. Well, are there any other questions for Mr. Green that we didn't cover?
Do you have experience with any other grass for this approach for winter feeding?
For winter feeding?
Yeah.
Well, so there are the annuals. I mean, you've got ryegrass, annual, and cereal rye, wheat. There's the annuals that can make some very good winter pasture. That being said, I would throw out, I've always been a perennial guy. If I don't have to plant it, I'm happier. But whatever, say I did decide to plant some winter wheat or some cereal rye or some ryegrass force to help me with winter pasture, stop and think about still trying to do that strip grazing to reduce your waste. Because again, if I turn them out in one big pasture, the animal traffic, you're going to you're going to waste a lot of feed. So no matter what I'm looking at, if I can look at that strip grazing, but there are some annuals out there that do look at that, can provide some very good winter feed.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, it's very interesting what you're saying about the bale in the grazing strips, since you are making a good distribution of all the manure that in your pastures, and that will making a difference during the spring when it start regrowing all your pasture. That
Yeah.
you have all those bales in one side. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, I heard a great example not long ago from another speaker. And he says, kind of like if I hired a fertilizer truck and he came out and just went round and around my trees and round and around my water tank and left, I probably wouldn't be very happy, would I?
Yeah.
Well, if we're not careful, that's where our animals are putting all our manure is under our trees and around our water tank.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like there is a comment over there. Gabriel, do you want to read from Dr. Provenza?
Yeah, she was just saying that Dr. Provenza's research uh, explored uh, explored tannins in bird's foot trefoil as an antagonist for the alkaloids in tall fescue, allowing for a greater intake of fescue, and the trefoil is in the mix.
I've actually heard that. I've heard Fred talk about that. I don't even pretend to be as smart as Fred Provenza is. He's done some mighty good work, and I'm glad they brought that up because I've heard that work too, and I think there's some others, honestly, that to me it all goes back to that. The more diverse we can get, it's a catch-22 though. I'll throw it out right quick. The more, even on my place, I'm running into uh, because of my intensive grazing system stuff, I'm getting a more diverse system. I don't have as much fescue now, so I don't have as much stockpile. So it's kind of like, oh, what do I do? And I've had a few other guys tell me this too, because we're after diversity that's going to help us with our endophyte situation. But fescue being the best one for stockpile, it kind of starts hurting us some there. So I don't know the answer actually, because I love the diversity.
Yeah. Yeah, there is another comment over there, Gabriel.
Yeah, is endophyte free fescue still a problem?
I'm really glad that question came up because it's a soapbox of mine. If you're south of I-70 in Missouri, you shouldn't be planting endophyte free fescue. We proved back in the 80s it'll only last you about 2 or 3 years. It will not stand the hot summers, the droughty soils. The endophyte, turns out the endophyte makes the plant tough. It's that symbiotic deal to stand up better to our droughty soils or dry summers. And endophyte free will last about 2 to 3 years and it's gone. Northern Missouri, I think we can keep it. If I was planting a new stand, I would definitely look at the novel endophyte fescues though, because they've got what we call a friendly endophyte that's not toxic to the animal, but seems to make the plant strong. And they've been around long enough now that if I was redoing a field, that's what I would look at.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
it looks like it's about
yeah.
that time, right? So I think
Yeah.
we're gonna just wrap up, but I wanted to, thank everyone for coming today. Thank you, Mr. Green. We really appreciate your time. For all of you that are going to be here for the coming weeks, next week on the 25th, we're going to be working with Dr. Amanda Grev, and we're going to be having a checklist before you buy hay and feed for winter feeding. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about next week. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up, and we look forward to seeing you guys in a week.
Thank you, Mark Green. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everybody, see you next Monday.